The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The East Lindsey series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to East Lindsey again, folks. It's been a while since we were here. Now, all this week we're going to have a series of villages which are between the A153 and the A158. This is the A153 that you can see behind me here, and the sun's up, got glorious sunshine. It's going to look fantastic. Let's get things started with West Ashby. West Ashby, Ash Tree Farm, West. Hello everyone out there in East Lindsey. It's been a little while since I was last here. Last time it was still icy underfoot, if you remember. Well, this week it won't be anywhere near as cold as that. It's the summertime, and that's the perfect time of year to explore the Lincolnshire Wolds. I've got 5 for you this week, which aren't on them apart from 1, but they are very much on the edge. Between the Wolds and Horncastle, there's an area that's defined by lots of open countryside, very few dwellings, a handful of farms and a pair of main roads, namely the A153 and the A158. We'll be flying up and down those roads this week as we take on the tiny villages that sit between them. First up, it's West Ashby. This one sits on the A153 and includes a main village and 3 small hamlets. Namely, they are Middlethorpe or Midthorpe, Farthorpe and Firshills. There was another hamlet in the parish too in medieval times, but the plague got rid of that. It was called Northorpe, and today very little remains of it. West Ashby is based around the main road, and being a linear village, most of its interesting bits are on it. These include the village hall, the church and the West Ashby Arms pub. Off the main road to the east is a grand hall known as West Ashby Manor. It has a modest parkland that covers the northeastern reaches of the village, and defining its boundary is the River Waring, which we last saw in Belchford. It's only going to be a short walk this one, and there'll be a fair bit of driving, but West Ashby is worth a look. It might not be a household name, not the biggest village ever, but it's still got to be covered. So let's do it. We begin in the car in the western reaches of the parish on a road called Shearman's Wath. This crosses the River Bain at Shearman's Wath Bridge between the A158 and the A153. Remember, the word wath means ford, so at some point before there was ever a bridge here, people forded the river. To the south of this road in the fields are a series of crop marks which mark the location of an ancient henge. It's called Shearman's Wath Henge to give it its full name. Defined as a Class 2 henge, it's a single ring ditch with a concentric ring of post holes or pits outside it, with opposed entrances. It's about 150 metres east of the River Bain on the edge of its floodplain, defined by glacial sands and gravels. The crop mark is around 25 metres in diameter. Now, of course, we can't see it from within this car. We can't walk to it either, though. It's all private land around here. The best way to see it is by using aerial photographs, and I found some. Shearman's Wath Henge was first discovered by the use of aerial photography in the 1970s. Although these show no sign of a bank, you can clearly see the ditch encircled by the pits. There are at least 24 of them, some of these obscured by glacial markings. The chances are the pits may have accommodated wooden posts or perhaps upright stones. However, the chances of there being stones here once upon a time is rather low. No other Lincolnshire henges used them. They were more of a Derbyshire thing. It would also raise another question: if there were indeed stones here, where on earth would they have come from? Unfortunately, we'll never know because ploughing has eradicated any potential clues. Field walking in 1981, though, turned up 41 pieces of glacial flint in the vicinity of the henge. The collection would not be out of place within a late Neolithic or early Bronze Age context, and so that's our best guess as to how old this is. Note too from the photographs that you can also see the old course of the River Bain before it was artificially straightened. That strengthens the argument that this site was somehow ceremonially linked to other sites associated with the Bain, such as the round barrows of Grimm's Mound and Ludford further north. Now, something else that's close to the Bain in West Ashby is a golf club located within Ashby Park. Let's check that out next. Even though we're in West Ashby, 1.5 miles away from Horncastle, it's the location of Horncastle Golf Club, which opened in 1990. It's one of the more idyllic settings for the game. It's a picturesque 18-hole course open to all golfers. 5,577 yards long, it's renowned for the challenge it presents to everybody. It consists of 5 par 3s, 10 par 4s and 3 par 5s. In terms of hazards, there are 2 large lakes and 14 ponds, which make the course strategically one of the more challenging that Lincolnshire has to offer. So why are there so many lakes? Well, the answer, as always, lies in industry. A long time ago, sand and gravel were extracted near the River Bain, leaving behind some big pits when it was all over. Now, when you leave the golf club and head towards West Ashby Village, one thing you might not realise is what you're passing through. On the eastern side of the course is a road called Horncastle Road, and that passes through a small hamlet called Furze Hills. That was the site of a now deserted medieval village called Northorpe. To avoid any confusion here, Furze Hills and Northorpe are one and the same thing. Furze Hills was just built on top of Northorpe long after the plague came to town. Very little is known about Northorpe, and there are virtually no remains of it, save for perhaps the odd patch of earthworks here and there. Okay, so we've now driven into West Ashby Village, and before we can actually start walking around, we need to check out a landmark that's kind of out of the way, effectively. It's on the A153, but it's a long way from the village cluster. It's the village hall, and it's over there. Before we can get to walking, we have the village hall to check out. This is to the south of the main West Ashby cluster along the A153. You could so easily mistake this for a house if it wasn't for the village hall sign outside on the grass. This is a relatively young hall, having only been built in 1964. Unlike some village halls with roots in older buildings, this one appears to have been purpose-built. The hall is a registered charity and serves as the focal point for the village. The first thing to catch in the village itself is West Ashby Manor, although it's kind of obscured by trees and we can't see it. Some people call this simply the Hall. It sits at the end of a road that runs perpendicular to the A153. In the quadrant that's formed by this lane and the A153 to the northwest is the manor's modest parkland, delineated to the east by the route of the River Waring. The manor was originally an early 18th century building and one of the oldest in the village. The house that sits here today was built in the 1840s, with a later 19th century farmstead around it. The hall stands on Manor Lane, although the name of this road used to be School Lane in reference to something that used to stand on the corner. There was a public elementary school on the corner of Main Road and Manor Lane once upon a time. It was built in 1874 by public subscription at a cost of £300. It could hold a maximum of 100 children. It closed its doors for the last time on New Year's Eve 1980 and has now been sympathetically converted into a house with little structural alteration. Okay, we are now on the A153 again, after walking along Manor Lane or School Lane, whichever you prefer to call it. Now, there might not be a school here anymore, but there is definitely a pub here in West Ashby. If I just hop out of the way, you might be able to see the pub on the left-hand side up there. Let's check it out. West Ashby may not have a school anymore, but it does have a pub. This here is the West Ashby Arms on the A153. The name is a modern thing. This was formerly known as the Green Dragon Inn. There could well have been another pub in the village at one time too. White's directory gives us a clue for that. In 1856 it lists both the Green Dragon and a beer house. We can account for the Green Dragon, but where was the beer house? Was it here too? Whatever the case, this is it for now. This is a multi-roomed country pub and it sits in pleasant surroundings and across from the church. It's had a fair share of issues down the years, but it reopened for business in July 2024. If you pop in here of an evening, you might find a quiz going on. Several are held here to raise money for the church restorations. And speaking of that, although located in a tiny village, this church is one of the largest in the area, and it's said to date back originally to the 13th century. The present building is thought to have been built at some point during the reign of Henry VII between the years 1485 and 1509. The tower was extensively restored in 1871 as a memorial to the Victorian ballad writer Charlotte Allington Barnard, who composed under the pen name Clarabelle. It contains 3 normal bells, although they're not in use, and some light tubular bells as well. In 1903, a clock was placed in the tower by a local man called Mr. Bassett in memory of his mother. Around the walls of the church there are a number of memorial tablets to members of the prominent local families. Perhaps the most interesting of these is the tablet on the north wall of the chancel. That one memorialises Richard Calthrop, who was a midshipman in the Royal Navy and fell at the Battle of Algiers in 1816. The church retains its Norman doorway and the tower boasts some fine gargoyles. The interior has some interesting stained glass and a memorial to those who lost their lives in World War I. Now, a little bit later around this route we'll head down Church Lane, which is the narrow road that goes up the side of the church. That passes a very interesting property which has a few features which came from a very notable house in London. We'll see what that is in a moment. But first though, we're going to be heading down the A153 a little bit further, this way. The village hall is in this direction, but we're not going quite that far. We're heading towards a house called the Grove. There are some grand old buildings in West Ashby, far more than just the manor house. If you follow the road from the church towards the village hall, you'll come to another one. It's called the Grove. It was once the home of the powerful Elmhurst family and is said to be haunted today by several ghosts. It became a hotel for a while. Can you imagine spending a night here knowing it's haunted? Well, that's exactly what its current residents do. Today, the Grove is a residential care home, and if you live here, you're a brave soul. The Grove is a Georgian manor house built in the 1840s like its counterpart just up the road. It became a care home just over 25 years ago. It offers residential, long-term, respite and daycare for 19 residents. The Grove has recently been rated good by the CQC. After an about turn, we find ourselves on Church Lane, and here's a third grand old building. This is West Ashby House. This was the vicarage, but it's now a private home. It was built in around 1710 and underwent alterations in the mid-18th, early 19th and 20th centuries. It's constructed of red brick and has plain tile and pan-tile roofs with brick coped and tumbled gables, slightly projecting gable stacks and a single ridge stack to the rear. Defined as a Queen Anne mansion, it was formerly used by the bishops of Carlisle. The front door and portico are said to have come from Captain Cook's house at Mile End in London. A few sources reckon it's West Ashby Manor that has the front door and portico from his house instead. Trust me though, it's this one. They were inserted into the building in the 1930s, but nobody seems to know why. It's one of those architectural mysteries that make Lincolnshire so fascinating. Okay, once past that house, Church Lane then becomes a public footpath, and we can follow this for quite a distance actually. It runs to Middlethorpe or Midthorpe, which is just to the north of West Ashby. We'll drive to that in a moment though. We're only going to use the footpath for part of its way to get back to the top of the village, and then we'll come back down and into the village again so I can pick up the car. So now all that remains really is to walk back to the start by completing a small circuit of the remainder of West Ashby using a footpath and a couple of minor lanes. West Ashby today relies a lot on Horncastle for its main amenities. It was a different story in the middle of the 19th century when the village was self-sufficient. It had everything from a baker to a wheelwright. Today, the only facilities are the pub and the church, unless you want to count the golf club and the care home. The change in its makeup is clearly reflected in its population. It stood at 584 in 1841, and that compares with the 250 or so that you can find here now. Right, now to end this episode, we have to see two small hamlets that also lie within the boundaries of West Ashby. They're both to the north and they're called Middlethorpe and Farthorpe. Of the two, it's Middlethorpe that's the most interesting. Sometimes known as Midthorpe instead, this has one of the best examples of a manorial moated complex in East Lindsey. Even so, I wasn't totally sure how much of it I was going to be able to see. Let's have a closer look at it. So in a way, I'm kind of wishing I walked this actually, because you can see over there where the footpath that we used a moment ago comes out. It just basically then runs across this field and in to Middlethorpe or Midthorpe. And the field of earthworks I'm interested in is here. So in theory, I could have crossed it on foot, but never mind. We're here with the car now, so can't turn back time, can I? The earthworks here are the remains of a village known as Norcotes, a former settlement which is mentioned in medieval documents. Midthorpe may represent the remains of Norcotes, which is a name that's long since fallen out of use. These earthworks include the remains of two moats. There are also several ditches and pits, which are probably related to the medieval settlement, although most of those can't be accurately dated. It's known that one of the pits was a domestic rubbish pit. Its fill contained things like ash and charcoal, as well as pottery and animal bone. Everything was covered in a deep soil containing a small amount of pottery, indicating abandonment probably in the 16th century or earlier. It's a similar story up the road in Farthorpe, where there's a smaller set of earthworks. In this case though, we can't see them at all. That's because most of them are part of Farthorpe Farm, which has been built on the site since it was deserted. The earthworks here consist of some extensive field banks and minor crofts, as well as crop marks which can be identified on aerial photography. Okay then, West Ashby is done and we can move along to the next one. This has been, believe it or not, the largest one you'll see this week. From here on in, things start to get a lot smaller. Tomorrow we're off to a village that we've mentioned before, but so far not yet seen. It has a church and a garage and not much more. See you there. Welcome back to East Lindsey again, everybody. Now, you can tell where I am today quite easily because, as you can see, there's a village sign right there. So let's have a little wander around this place. It's one we've mentioned before by name, and it is on the Lincolnshire Wolds. It's the only village this week, actually, that's on the Wolds. All the others are kind of just away from the Wolds, outside of the boundaries. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. This is the village and the parish, as you can see, of Fulletby. Fulletby, Foul Stream Village. Alright folks, today we're taking on a village that we've mentioned before by name, but so far we've not yet seen. When we were in Belchford a while back, we spoke at length about how it has a connection to another place at the top of that big hill that I drove down. That village is Fulletby, the only one of the 5 parishes I'm covering this week that's within the boundaries of the Lincolnshire Wolds. This is 3 miles northeast of Horncastle, 9 miles away from Louth, and 8 miles northwest of Spilsby. Fulletby was a village that the Romans knew well. This makes sense given that the Roman road, High Street, isn't far away from us. They occupied this part of Lincolnshire from the 1st century through to the 4th century AD. Roman funeral urns were dug up in the parish in 1849. They contained burned bone fragments and one contained a Roman coin. Although it looks like a substantial village on the map, a lot of its lanes are just that, lanes. The number of houses here is quite small. As such, Fulletby has a tiny population and is usually grouped together with Low Toynton, an equally small village, when it comes to admin. A lot of the houses that are here are fairly modern. Gone now are the mud and stud cottages, which used to be a key feature of Fulletby in the 1840s. Today, the oldest building that remains here is the church dedicated to St Andrew. It was rebuilt in 1705, but its tower fell down in 1799, and so a further rebuild was needed. Other than that, the only thing of note here today is a garage, but I bet you I can find a bit more. Let's see, shall we? Let's go walking. We begin this short walk around Fulletby outside a garage in the west of the village. This is one of the few businesses in Fulletby today. The village no longer has what it used to. Many businesses have long since disappeared from this place. That said, it does still have a clutch of small ones and a couple of working farms. And yes, farming has always been a key economic driver out here. In 1885, Kelly's Directory reported that the area's chief crops were wheat, barley, oats and turnips. Not a lot changes. Now, because Fulletby is on a dead straight lane, which I use to get to it from the A153, a lot of traffic just flies past that garage and through Fulletby to wherever it's going. Not many people actually explore this area, which I'm about to take you around now. There's not much to this. It looks like a substantial village on the map, but trust me, this really isn't. So let's have a walk around the village. Because there's not a lot of houses here, Fulletby is one of those villages that looks a lot bigger than it actually is. It's defined by a series of tight, narrow lanes, a lot of which don't have much on them. What few houses there are hidden from view in a lot of cases. The lanes are what's known as sunken, with their banks yielding a variety of wildflowers and grasses, all sheltered by a mature canopy of tall, thick trees or hedgerows. It's not a touristy village, but a lot of walkers do know it. The long-distance footpath, the Viking Way, runs through the village for a start. On top of that, Fulletby is a popular starting point for those who wish to take advantage of the panoramic views from the high points around here. We are, of course, on a hill. On a clear day, it's possible to see Lincoln Cathedral to the west, Boston Stump to the south, and the wind turbines in the North Sea and the cliffs of North Norfolk beyond to the southeast. Fulletby is a long-established village. It dates back to at least the Roman occupation of Britain and was probably around even before that. We have the Saxons and the Vikings to thank for the village's name, and there is a reference to Fulletby in the Domesday Book which states it was owned by the family of none other than Harold Godwinson. Fulletby sits on top of the Lincolnshire Wolds and is in fact one of the highest points in the southern reaches of these distinctive hills. Through the centuries, it's been well served by springs and wells, and the presence of water has been a key feature in how it's developed. Although not a lot of people live here now, at its most populous in the second half of the 19th century, the village had more than 350 residents in a largely self-sustaining community. It had all sorts of things to keep itself independent, including a brew house, a pub, a bakery, a slaughterhouse, and a general store. Fulletby School appears to have started in 1849, but the provision of a school teacher's house took another 10 years. The plans for it, dated 1858, were drawn up by Anthony Bellamy, as in he of Bellamy and Hardy of Lincoln. The building was constructed a year later and shows a date stone of 1859 in its south gable. Many small enterprises gradually faded as the 20th century progressed and motorised transport allowed easier access to Horncastle and Louth. Over time, the style and age of the buildings here has changed too. Older farm buildings and cottages have been replaced by new homes erected over the course of the 20th century. Now, all of the oldest surviving buildings are focused around St Andrew's Church. Wynn Cottage, for example, is one of them. That was the former village shop. It forms a group with Schoolhouse, Lizzie's Cottage and Blacksmith's Cottage, which all date from the middle of the 19th century. The name Wynn is quite relevant here too, by the way. The most famous Fulletby resident was Henry Wynn, known locally as the Grand Old Man of Lincolnshire. He was an acclaimed historian and poet who ran the village shop, established the village school, and served as a church warden and parish clerk for most of his long life. He lived to be 98. I'd imagine his fame is what led to this street being called Wynn Lane. By following this, we're coming towards Fulletby's centrepiece, the church. Well, as you probably gathered, it's a nice day today. The temperature is supposed to get up into about the 27-28 degree mark. And Fulletby is quite nice because it's shielded in quite a lot of leafy stuff, you know, trees, hedgerows, that sort of thing. So there's plenty of shade here. So even in the hot summer that we're currently experiencing, you can have a nice walk around this place and not get sunburnt, which is quite nice. I suppose if it is too warm, you can always take refuge in the church. And as you can see, we are at the church right now. It's open too. Let's go in and have a look. Grade 2 listed and dedicated to St Andrew, this church is built in the early English style. Fulletby has had a church for centuries, but the one that stands here today isn't the first. There are still some 14th century fragments in its stonework though, dating from its original construction. In 1705 the whole thing was rebuilt in green sandstone, an unusual commodity for the early 18th century. That perhaps contributed to the next major thing to happen here. Its tower fell down almost a century later in 1799. The church underwent another significant rebuilding in 1857 by Moreland Fowler. This would add the chancel, the porch, the nave and a bellcote, making it appear largely Victorian in style. The tower, though, was never reconstructed. The church is now part of the Hemmingby group of the Horncastle Deanery and can seat around 120 people. The church remains consecrated with a service every 2 months and is available for general use by the village at other times. Records from the 1880s tell us that Fulletby once had more than just this though when it came to religious buildings. The village had both a Wesleyan and a primitive Methodist chapel at one time, but those have now disappeared. Okay, so we mentioned Henry Wynne on our walk around the village there, and here in the church there's a massive board which tells you all about him. Now I'm not going to read all of this because it's quite long, you know, TLDR and all that, but if you poke your head into this church you can read all about this guy. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just see if you can read this here. Feel free to pause the video so you can have a little read about the guy. This board also shows a few other things too. In this bottom right corner there's some of the old mud and stud cottages that used to be here in Fulletby before they were torn down. There's a cart there, a horse and cart as well. And above that there's a windmill. Now Fulletby had a windmill which, as you can see, was dismantled in 1911, and it stood very close to where Fulletby Motors is now. So as you turn left onto Mill Lane, hence the name obviously, there's a little lane off to the left off Mill Lane behind Fulletby Motors, and that is where that windmill used to stand. As it happens, I completely forgot that to get back to the start here I have to pass that little lane where the mill once was, so I can show you firsthand. Here we go. There you go, that's where the mill used to be, down there behind Fulletby Motors. And if we continue up Mill Lane and turn right, we'll get back to the start. Just before we reach the end, here's a word for this little field opposite the garage. Since 2021, this field, which runs to 2 acres size-wise, has been available to the village for general recreational use. It was generously purchased by the residents of Fulletby, and it's called the Fulletby Glebe Field. It's run by a charitable trust on behalf of all the residents. Village fetes are held here annually. And so we find ourselves at the end of the walk already, having made it around pretty much the entire village. There's not a lot you haven't seen. Tomorrow we're off to another one that's equally small, so don't blink, will you? You might miss something. See you later. Welcome back to East Lindsey again, everybody. Now I've got a really small one for you today. This one is made up of 2, maybe 3 lanes, which are all like the one you can see behind me and in front of me. Check this out. No footpaths out here. I don't know what they are. But that's what gives East Lindsey most of its character. Now this has got a very interesting church, but I don't know whether we're going to be able to see it. I'll explain as we take a walk through Low Toynton. Low Toynton, Teoda's farm, Low. Today on TVI we come to the first of a pair of twins. Now there are several villages in Lincolnshire that have the name Toynton. There's at least 4, and those 4 are all close to each other. Mind you, it sort of makes sense when you consider they're named after somebody, Teoda, who must have been a powerful local landowner. 2 of the Toyntons can be found just to the east of Horncastle, whilst the other 2 are closer to Spilsby. Today we're in Low Toynton, probably the smallest of the lot. Low Toynton is about 1 mile away from Horncastle and occupies a lane which splits into 2 pieces. One of those pieces is a dead end, and that has nearly all of the houses in Low Toynton, and I can assure you that's not very many. The other part has the church, but as I understood it, Low Toynton's church was only accessible through a farmyard. With no rights of way shown on the map, I had to assume there was no legal way to access it. That was something I had to find out though when I got here. Should we make it to the building, we won't be seeing much of it anyway. Although a scheduled monument, it fell into disuse in 1959 and has never been restored. As such, the roof is dangerous and could so easily collapse if you're not careful. So, with that information in mind, this isn't going to be a long episode. In fact, this could well be one of the shortest the channel has ever seen. There's not much recorded history about Low Toynton, aside from a few tidbits I was able to pick up. We'll be through this one pretty quickly. Come with me and let's see if we can get to that village church that time forgot. This is Low Toynton, one of the smallest villages in East Lindsey, and that's saying something given the ones you've already seen. It sits on a pair of narrow lanes, one that contains nearly all the houses and the other that has the church, albeit set back from the road. There is a third lane too, which bypasses the village to the north between Fulletby and Horncastle, but there's nothing really special about that one. From end to end, Low Toynton can be walked in under 5 minutes. The lane with the houses on it is a dead end. In total, there are less than 20 dwellings here. In the Domesday Book, there were 2 entries for settlements around here called Toddintoun and Tedlintoun, both of which can be translated as Toynton. There are still 2 Toyntons today. In fact, there are 4, but 2 of them are closer to Spilsby than they are to Horncastle. The 2 referred to here are Low Toynton and High Toynton. The thing is, as informative as the Domesday Book is, and was, it's not clear which was which in those days, but the experts reckon this was Toddintoun. Both were substantial holdings though. In fact, the Toyntons at that time were considered to be more valuable than Horncastle, and they may even have been slightly bigger. That's quite a mental thing to consider now. Stone Age flints, Roman pottery and medieval items have been picked up within the parish boundaries of the Toyntons, suggesting these tiny villages have been occupied for centuries. Okay, so you've got 2 ways you can come into Low Toynton. You can use the road that I used, which is the southern of the 2 roads, and then the northern of the 2 roads is this one here, and it crosses this little stream. And as you can see, it's a ford at this point. Now we've got a very hot summer on our hands this year, so at the moment this stream is looking a little bit dry. In fact, I can probably walk through this and not even get my feet wet. Let's have a go, shall we? Yeah, there you go, it's barely even a puddle at the moment. It's nice though, if nothing else. There's a little bit of water in it, and it gives Low Toynton a bit of character. Let's talk a bit about this stream, actually, before we move on. Now we've reached the end of the houses, and the road splits at this point. To the north, this lane runs off to Fulletby, and it does so via a ford. Let's check this out. As we know, we're on the fringes of the Wolds here, and as an upland area, there are plenty of watercourses that start their journeys up here. Fulletby, which we saw yesterday, has several wells, springs and streams which flow down off the hills and end up in either the River Bain or the River Waring. This one, which originates just to the south of Fulletby, flows due west, skirting the northern edge of Low Toynton before crossing this lane and ending up in the Waring. It's a pretty little ford, and I'd imagine not everyone knows it's here, because most people that come to Low Toynton won't use this narrow lane. Instead, they'd come from the other direction via a much wider road from Horncastle. On that, there's Manor Farm and what remains of Low Toynton's parish church. This is Manor Farm on the bend in the road towards Horncastle. Low Toynton Manor Farmhouse is a mud and stud building which is thatched and Grade 2 listed. That makes it quite distinctive, and because it's unusual, it doesn't take a genius to work out which house it is. It's this beauty on the edge of the farmyard. Low Toynton only has two other listed structures. One of them is the church, the other is Willowbrook Farmhouse, close to where we began this walk a few moments ago. Now, of course, when you reach that house, the village kind of, well, stops, because beyond this point, it's just a long country road that runs into Horncastle. But of course, there is one thing we haven't yet seen here in Low Toynton, and I don't know whether we can. That would be the church. If we turn around here at this thatched building and head back up towards the ford again, on the right-hand side, there's a gate, which should, in theory, take us to the churchyard. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do this, though. Let's find out. So apparently I had nothing to worry about as far as accessing this church goes. All you have to do is go through the gate and up the grassy track that leads to it. There are no access issues. Now, Low Toynton's parish church is redundant, although it remains a Grade 2 listed building and a scheduled monument. It was dedicated to St. Peter. It was originally built in the 12th century, and fragments of that building still remain within the present one. However, most of the current church is 19th century. It was rebuilt of green stone in 1811 and remained in use until the end of 1959, when it started to fall into decay. Eventually, it was declared redundant by the Diocese of Lincoln in 1973 and was sold into private ownership. Although a 19th century church, St. Peter's is said to still contain its late Norman chancel arch, but there is some doubt about that. However, it definitely no longer has its perpendicular font. That was removed to Clixby when the church was made redundant. For some years it was used as a store, but by the turn of the 21st century it was abandoned completely and left to seemingly rot away. Now overgrown and smothered in ivy, the church is probably best left alone unless you're armed with the correct safety equipment. The roof is dangerous and could so easily collapse at any time. Well, it's always a sorry sight to see a derelict church, but I am happy I've managed to get to this one, because on the map it doesn't look accessible at all. I didn't know about this little track that you walk on to reach the church. That was something I couldn't see before I got here. But yeah, I'm glad we've got to that, because it just shows you what Low Toynton has religious buildings wise. Not a lot at the moment. You definitely don't want to be going inside that building, I'm telling you right now. The danger keep out signs are there for a reason. So if you do find yourself here in Low Toynton, please don't attempt to go into that church. It's definitely not in use anymore. The graveyard around it though certainly is. This headstone here is dated 2023, so very, very recent, you know, only 2 years ago. So yeah, it's obviously still used for burials, but not for any religious services. That's one Toynton down, and that was probably the easiest village we'll ever visit. Now, just to the south of Low Toynton, there's a neighbour which shares the same name. After passing through Horncastle, we'll be in the second of the 4 Toyntons, and that one too has had its fair share of church collapse issues. However, it's currently on the mend. See you tomorrow. Hey, welcome back to East Lindsey again, people. Now, yesterday we saw the first of the Toynton twins, or if you will, the Toynton quads, because we explored that there are actually 4 of them, 2 close to Horncastle and 2 much closer to Spilsby. Well, we've seen one of the ones that's close to Horncastle, and we're about to see the other one. This won't be a very long walk, but we will be spending quite a lot of time in the churchyard in this one, because it has a little story to tell that only happened in the last 5 years. This is High Toynton. High Toynton, Teoda's Farm, High. Today in East Lindsey we're continuing our journey through the area between the A153 and the A158 to the east of Horncastle. We've left the A153 behind now, and our next job is to have a look at a village that sits on the A158. The stretch of that road beyond Horncastle to the east runs directly towards one of the biggest tourist destinations we have in Lincolnshire. Yes, good old Skeg Vegas itself, Skegness. If that's a trip you've made in the summertime, the chances are you might well know High Toynton. That said, you probably don't know it very well unless you've ever stopped here for whatever reason. The trouble is with High Toynton that because most of it sits just off the A158 to the south, 90% of the village is never seen by the passing traveller. They just fly through the village within literally seconds, not knowing what a fabulous little village they're in. High Toynton is a very notable village actually. This is one of the 14 across the country that is doubly thankful, meaning none of its residents that served in either of the 2 world wars were killed or went missing. They all returned home safely. That in itself puts this one on the map, but in addition, High Toynton has also been in the eyes and ears of local Horncastle residents a lot over the past 5 years. The tower at its lovely Victorian church collapsed in 2020, and ever since it's undergone a process of rebuilding. Although it's not quite finished, we will get to see what the church looks like right now in this one and the fabulous job the stonemasons have done. We'll also explore why it collapsed in the first place. Come with me and let's tick it off. High Toynton can be described as a crossroads village. Essentially, it's laid out along just the one road, but that road crosses the A158. Most of the village lies on the southern side of the A158. This is the northern side, defined by just a handful of houses and the old vicarage on the road to Tetford. There isn't much of note here. A lot of these northern buildings are 20th century houses. All the good stuff, and the historic stuff too, is on the other side of the main road. So here is the A158, and this is the first time we've seen this major road on the eastern side of Horncastle. Thousands of people know this stretch because of where it goes. Every year, day trippers and holidaymakers breeze through High Toynton on their way to Lincolnshire's favourite coastal resort, Skegness. Not many people stop here. They generally don't have a reason to because Horncastle is so close. This place does have a few nice bits to admire though. Let's check out the old phone box. Yes, indeed, there is a phone box, and there's also this bus shelter right next to it. High Toynton bus stop, as you can see. Brick built. You don't see many of these around. Let's have a look inside. Ooh. Up here, look at this. Painting on bus. And then over here, a nice piece of artwork. I'm not totally sure what that's supposed to be, but it looks nice enough. There's a notice board and the bus time, list of the bus times towards Lincoln, the 56. Number 56 bus is what you need to catch here. So let's have a look at that phone box. So come with me. Now I know this phone box is not in use anymore. I just want to see what it is used for now. There's some nice paintings on the side of it. Some dragonflies at the top there, a few flowers, butterflies towards the bottom. I think are they tulips or roses? Or they might even be poppies, actually. There's nothing actually in the box though. It's still nice though, even though it's a bit weather worn. So let's head along here, past this house next to it, which by the way has a postbox in the wall, a Victorian one no less, and as you can see it's a yoga studio. In a village this small there is a yoga studio. How about that? And here we have the church. Now this is going to be the centerpiece of this episode, and there's a really good reason why. There have been people living in High Toynton for more than 1,000 years, and the church has been at its heart from the very start. The earliest documented evidence of a church at High Toynton comes in the form of a charter issued in 1231 to the Bishop of Carlisle by Henry III. Not a lot of that early building remains now, but incorporated within the porch of the tower here, there were the remains of 2 zigzag arches that dated from the Norman building. This church is certainly a little different to look at. Dedicated to St John the Baptist, there are a variety of stones used here, although the main one is greenstone. It had 2 bells, one that probably dated back to the 14th century and the other brought back to the church in 1934 after being used at Queen Elizabeth's Grammar School in Horncastle since 1772. It's been much changed and renovated over the years. Now, as I'm sure you'll notice, there's no tower here. There was though until 5 years ago. In 2020, the tower, a tall, thin piece of stonework which marked the main entrance, collapsed. In the 5 years since that happened, stonemasons have been working to restore the damage. So why did it collapse? In this day and age, for a church tower to fall so spectacularly is almost unheard of. Well, to understand this, we have to go right back to 1772. The late 18th century saw the original Norman church here be demolished, but a new one replaced it almost immediately, built of local sandstone. The architectural plans for that building still exist. It was smaller than the previous church, and there were 7 box pews and a pulpit within the nave. It was a neat little building, but it didn't last long. By 1850, restoration work was being carried out, and just 22 years later, the decision was made to demolish it completely when a curate inspecting the false roof fell through it. And so it was up to the Victorians to have another go. Designed by the famous architect Ewan Christian, a new, 3rd church was built, taking it back to its original size. The specification dictated that the foundations for the tower be deep enough to ensure there were no graves underneath. Despite the best attentions of the Victorian builders, the tower had to have braces fitted within several decades of its erection, so one would assume they weren't happy with the idea. By the late 1980s, there were issues with the tower. It was subsiding quite badly, and there was some talk of ripping it down before it fell down. However, the rural dean of the time stated that, in his opinion, it would be too costly to do that. The villagers then sprang into action and started fundraising. With tremendous effort, they eventually raised more than £30,000, underpinning the tower in 1989, with additional work undertaken a year or 2 later. But that didn't solve the problem. In 2020, it fell down, and after analysis of the rubble in 2023, it was determined that the reason was something you might not have initially expected. As we know, Victorian builders were very good at what they did, but here they had a bit of a rare nightmare. It's believed that the collapse was mainly due to the use of poor materials. In any event now, St John the Baptist Church is taking on another brand new form, thanks to the rebuilding efforts that have taken place ever since. In order to repair the damage, residents were able to secure £200,000 worth of National Lottery Heritage funding, which was allocated to High Toynton in July 2022. And here's something that surprised the builders. if you look up, you'll see a hole above the new doorway. That's where a bat was found to be living. Simply named the High Toynton bat, he's now got his own little piece of plasterwork on the wall inside the church. Well, I'll tell you something, people, I couldn't have timed this better, because the builders literally finished yesterday, and so the church is ready for its grand reopening, which is tomorrow. Today is June the 20th. June the 21st it will be open for business once again. So yeah, what a cracking little story. It's got a bit of tragedy to it, obviously, with the collapse of the tower, but a renewed sense of hope now, should we say, for this new church. It looks fantastic. The builders have done a great job, and yeah, I'd be very proud to live in High Toynton if this was my church building. Well done, people, for raising the money to get that thing fixed. The rest of the village is all located to the south of the church along a road called Gravel Pit Lane. It's been this way since, well, records came into existence. South of the A158 was the site of the original High Toynton village, founded in medieval times. The village as we see it now is much newer, with the oldest buildings only dating back to the 17th century. There are some medieval settlement remains, and you can see some of the old field systems around the village. They survive as earthworks. The remains include crofts, field boundaries, ridges and furrows, and various trackways. The village as we see it now looks a little different to how it would have in those times. High Toynton has been here for much longer than that though. Around the village, evidence of Roman, Neolithic and Bronze Age occupation has been found in a few places. There are no amenities here, like shops for example. In 1885, Kelly's Directory noted the existence of a Wesleyan chapel built in 1840, but that's long since disappeared. At the time, the lord of the manor was James Banks Stanhope of Revesby Abbey. High Toynton was mainly concerned with the production of cereal crops, and it remains agricultural to this day. The modern village possesses two very attractive thatched cottages, both of which are listed buildings. The only other listed building in the village is the church. This one is known as the Thatched Cottage, and the other is called the Thatched House. We're simple folk as Lincolnshire people with names. The Thatched Cottage is late 18th century and can be defined as a mud and stud house that's been colour washed. Personally, this is my favourite of the two, but the other one is also fabulous. Beautiful thatched buildings, aren't they? There's another one to see as well in just a moment. To get to it, got to walk between the two, and really all there is between them is just these two houses. Not much more than that. The other thatched building is up here. The thatched house has the same specifications, mud and stud and late 18th century, although this one has had a few alterations over the years since. Now once you get beyond these two gorgeous houses and the others which High Toynton possesses, Gravel Pit Lane becomes a track and ends up at a small wood after passing a farm. So the only thing we can do here is turn around and head back to the start. There is one more thing we need to mention about this place though. High Toynton is one of only a few doubly thankful villages in England, meaning that all of its residents who fought in World War I and World War II returned home. In 1931, Arthur Mead discovered that of all 16,000 English villages, only 32 were places where no resident soldier died in World War I. This was one of them. Of those 32, only 14 of them have the honour of also seeing everyone return safely from World War II as well. That means High Toynton is a village that's a member of a special club. And so, after making our way back to the start and returning to the car, we're now going to join those day trippers and holiday makers and use the A158 to find the next one. Up next we have yet another tiny village, but it's not on this road. It's a little way to the south, where none of this coastbound traffic ever goes. I'll see you there tomorrow. Welcome back to East Lindsey, everybody, for the final time this week. I'm beginning this episode with a beautiful view, and I say that completely biasedly as a Lincolnshire boy. Check this out. Isn't this beautiful? Isn't this fantastic? Farmland with the farmers in the fields. There's a couple of tractors down there, combine harvester as well. There's a few clouds in the sky, but generally speaking it's nice, bright, clear. It's about 27, 28 degrees, and I've got this for a view. It's wonderful. Now, where will you find this field? This field can be found on, well, this road, this little lane. Now, if you find yourself on this lane, you'll be standing next to the site of a church which has been pulled down. It was pulled down a long time ago. This is the little hamlet of Scrayfield, and if you go through this hamlet, it'll take you towards today's main village. This is the parish of Mareham on the Hill. Mareham on the Hill, Poole Village on the Hill. Rounding off the week in East Lindsey, today we hit the parish of Mareham on the Hill, perhaps one of the lesser known villages around Horncastle. The thing I love about this one is the fact that it's so close to the A158, yet if you set foot in the village you'd think you were nowhere near a major road. This one is so peaceful, so quiet, and just all round lovely. Mareham on the Hill is about 2.5 miles away from Horncastle. It has relatively little barring a pretty thatched cottage, an old schoolhouse, an old Wesleyan chapel, and its Grade 2 listed church dedicated to All Saints. Mind you, what it lacks in terms of features it makes up for in pure rural charm. It's a classic East Lindsey village. It is, to all intents and purposes, a linear village occupying one lane which runs from north to south. The church is in a bit of a weird place, accessed unusually not by the road but by a footpath from the south or via a farmyard to the north. I reckon the church here is one of the best we will ever have seen in Lincolnshire, and we've seen a few. Aside from that church, the only other listed building here is Manor Grange Farmhouse, which is 18th century and made of red brick. The parish also includes the hamlet of Scrayfield, which used to have a church of its own, dedicated to St Michael. Long gone, I'll show you where that was in this video. By the way, Mareham means pool village, suggesting there was some sort of pool or pond or lake around here. There must have been a fair few around Horncastle, because on the hill helps to distinguish it from Mareham le Fen, not too far away to the south. So for one last time this week, let's go. Now, to begin with today, we need to first of all cover the hamlet of Scrayfield, which lies to the east of Mareham on the Hill, between the village and the A158. Scrayfield is not a lot more than a couple of farms and a few isolated houses, but it used to have a church a long time ago. As you drive into the hamlet from the A158, you need to look to your left if you want to see where that building was. It took me a little while to figure out exactly where it stood, but I did find it. Let's have a look. This is all that remains of the ancient church or chapel of St Michael. It fell into disrepair in the early 1800s, and by 1842 it had gone completely, although the churchyard was still used. Today it's very overgrown and not looked after by anyone. The northern part of the churchyard was levelled in 1977, and now only a single gravestone remains, dating from the 18th century. Well, I thought I'd just pop my head in to see if I could find the gravestone, the one and only gravestone that is remaining here. I can't see it anywhere, but then again, it's probably not the easiest thing to find because this is mostly, as you can see, all overgrown and whatnot. It could even be in those nettles and things over there, so no idea whereabouts it is. As it turns out, it's not the only gravestone, because there is another one here as well. I think this is actually a memorial. As you can see here, there's a little plaque down here that says Stephen Reed, 1936 to 2017, greatly missed by Judy and our family. So technically speaking, I guess that's another gravestone, but I would imagine he's not buried there. I wouldn't have thought so. So I wonder where this gravestone is. We're just going to have a little explore while I'm in here, see if I can pin it down, but I'm certainly not going to go traipsing through all this lot if it's in there. I have no idea whereabouts it will be, if it's anywhere visible, but from my sources there is one gravestone remaining somewhere. It's just a question of finding it. Well, there's the top of the churchyard. It's not going to be in that because that's just a massive field. I reckon it's in this lot. So wherever it may be, it's probably not visible right now with it being summer. Maybe in the winter time when everything's died back a little bit, you can maybe see it then. But yeah, this is the site of St Michael's Church in Scrayfield. Now this isn't the only important thing about Scrayfield actually. As we drive into Mareham, I'll tell you a little bit about a battle that took place around here. There is no doubt that Scrayfield was much bigger than this at one time. There are earthwork remains all around here, and the fact it had a church is a massive clue. Scrayfield used to be a parish in its own right, but it was abolished in 1936 and merged with Mareham on the Hill. The village was not listed in the Domesday Book. Instead, it was first mentioned in documentary sources in 1183. It's famous for one thing, even though it's so tiny. Scrayfield and Mareham on the Hill are both close to a battlefield. The Battle of Winceby was fought on the 11th of October 1643 during the English Civil War. During ploughing of the fields around Scrayfield some years ago, a breastplate and a backplate of an early 17th century date were found, believed to have come from that battle. There were no human bones found inside or nearby either piece, so it could be that the armour was thrown off in a hurry to aid flight from the battle. The positions of the latchets retaining the shoulder pieces may be significant too. One was in the shut position, the other open. That means possibly one side was undone so that the armour could be wrenched off. All of this makes sense when you consider where Scrayfield lies. The village is positioned directly on a route that might have been taken by royalist troops fleeing back to Horncastle after their defeat in the battle. Okay then, here we are in Mareham on the Hill. I nearly said Mareham Le Fen there. It's very easy to get those two mixed up because there's a Mareham on the Hill, there's a Mareham Le Fen as well, which isn't too far away from here. So this is our start point outside the old smithy, which you can see right there. We're in the northernmost part of Mareham on the Hill. We're just generally going to work our way south to the church and then work our way back again. Not really a lot here, but yeah, it's a beautiful village. Having driven through it, I know what it looks like, and in a moment you will too. Let's begin this walk around Mareham on the Hill in the northwest of the village. This road is the main one and has most of the properties. Follow this road to the northwest and you'll emerge at Horncastle, whilst to the southeast, in the other direction, you'll end up at Hameringham. Mareham on the Hill means pool village or settlement of pool dwellers. There are two Marehams in East Lindsey, Mareham-le-Fen is just a few miles away to the south. This northern end of the village is all houses, but one of them is a former chapel. Religiously, the only thing Mareham has now is the Church of All Saints. This was a Wesleyan Methodist chapel built in 1853 with money left by one Zachariah Goh. I should stress that his full name is not accurately known. In any event, his money was put to good use and the chapel served the village for just over a century. It closed at some point between 1956 and 1970, when it was no longer labelled as such on OS maps. The building is of red brick and has a gabled roof with decorative barge boards on the eaves. A delightful building all ends up, it's now in the lucky possession of a private owner. Okay, let's start to make our way towards the church now, which is not on this road actually. It's a bit weird. It's off the road behind most of the houses which are coming up along here. And the reason for that is because, well, Mareham used to be quite a bit bigger than what it is right now. So let's head towards the church next, and to do that we have to leave this road behind briefly. The church isn't on it. To get to it, you have to go through or around a farmyard. Mareham on the Hill is by no means as large as it once was. It's a shrunken village, which explains why this church is nowhere near the road. Today the village is centred on the road, but all around it in the fields are the remains of what was once here. There are earthworks all over the place. However, a lot of them have been ploughed away. In 1976, shallow ploughing revealed lots of medieval tiles and pottery, suggesting Mareham might have had a small pottery making business. Several trackways, crofts, ridges and furrows still remain in an area stretching from the church up to the Grade 2 listed Mareham Grange farmhouse a ways north of the main village cluster. Mareham's church is dedicated to All Saints and it's a Grade 2 listed building dating originally from the 12th century. It was rebuilt in the 15th, restored in 1780 and remodelled in 1804. This is in regular use by the community and well used because it's the only public meeting place in the village. A footpath that passes through the churchyard is part of the Lincolnshire Wolds Walk. The church and churchyard are used by walkers and birdwatchers as well as families researching genealogy. Regular visitors often picnic on the benches just outside it, which are also used by those who just like to sit and ponder in the solitude they provide, as birds soar above. Materials-wise, this one is built of Spilsby green sandstone, limestone and red brick, and is colour washed in a lovely white colour that stands out well in the bright sunshine. The colour wash helps to hide the unevenness of the exterior masonry, even though it is now itself quite worn. The building is quite simple, being as it is a nave and a chancel all rolled into one. On the roof is a small bell tower with a single bell and a weather vane atop it. Excavations carried out in 1985 revealed that at one time this church was a bit bigger. The medieval nave was broader and had a south aisle. The present nave wall and windows both date from that remodelling in 1804, whilst the steeple which this once possessed was taken down in 1780. Inside the church are charming Georgian furnishings, a double-decker pulpit and box pews, all painted blue, contrasting with a contemporary floor of red brick. It also has a hatchment memorial, possibly in memory of Mary Nichols, the wife of Reverend Richard Ward. One thing I get asked quite a lot as I travel around the country is what's your favourite village? Which one would you say is the one that stands out head and shoulders above the others? I don't think it's Mareham. I don't think it's Mareham on the Hill, but I'll tell you something, it might well be up there in sort of the top 20. This churchyard is just so quiet, so peaceful. All I can hear at this present moment in time is the birds in the trees behind me. Can't hear any of the roads, can't hear the A158, even though it's close-ish to Mareham. Can't hear it at all. All I can hear is just nature. It's fantastic. It's no wonder people like coming here. Returning to the road, the first thing you see at the southern end of Mareham is this wonderful thatched cottage called Medlar's. This is an early 18th century mud and stud cottage which consists of a single storey and an attic with a central stack. It was altered in both the 19th and 20th centuries, which saw the construction of a rendered brick lean-to with a pan-tiled roof. I would love to live here. How about you? To complete the walk, all we have to do is walk back up the road in the opposite direction. Isn't Mareham on the Hill just a wonderful little village? Okay then, that's Mareham on the Hill done and dusted. As we learned earlier, there's another Mareham in East Lindsey, Mareham Le Fen. That one's for another time though, because it's to the south of here. When we return to the district again, we'll be heading back north. Join me again soon for more out here in Deep East Lincolnshire. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.